Hello and welcome to the Real Success Podcast. I'm your host, Candice Mama. If you are rejoining us, welcome back. And if this is your first time, be sure that you are liking, sharing, and subscribing so more people can find us. Today's guest is none other than international entrepreneur, the number one social media expert in the world, speaker, an actual life changer, Paul O'Mahony. Paul is based all the way in Ireland, and he made time to make sure that he is speaking to us today. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. Here's Paul O'Mahony. Paul, in between all the incredible things that you do, I mean, you're an entrepreneur, you're an author, you're a columnist. I mean, I was just looking at everything you do, and I had no clue how much stuff you actually do. So it is really an honor that you took this time to spend with us on the Real Success Podcast.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
But how do you find the time to do everything, Paul? Let's start there. Where do you find the time?
I find people that are much better than me at doing what they enjoy, and allow them to do it and pay them to do it, basically. That seems to help a lot, the last bit, when you pay them to do it. So yeah, I mean, that's from running businesses, from managing teams, my management team, my CEOs, even family-wise. You know, it's very difficult to try to take everything on and expect things to run seamlessly without getting help. So, you know, I've helped in all areas: business, family, and even exercise, sport, anything like that. I make sure I've got a shortcut, somebody to show me how to do it better. If, unfortunately, in health, you kind of have to do it yourself. It's hard to find people who'll do your press ups for you, but in all other areas, there's generally people who could do the hard work for you and happy to do it as well.
Don't you wish in exercise you could like get someone, be like, please take my body and go work it out and bring it back at like
amazing. Yeah, amazing. I don't know what I would do when they take it away for a while, but
No, but speaking of which, so you've been training for your first marathon, right?
Well, that's an interesting one. Actually, I didn't train at all for the marathon. I just woke up not that long ago and just decided, because of being in COVID world, I never was too keen on doing a marathon because it involved 6 months of training in theory, carb loading and eating properly and getting your times. And I never understood why you would run 18 miles a few times and then 23 miles and then decide, okay, I'm going to stop now. That's good. I know I can run 23. It never made any sense to me. Just finish it. If you're at 23, why would you decide to think, oh, that's great, I got so close, but I'm going to start again? And I just decided, because you could sign up virtually, that I registered to one in the US that allowed you to run any time in that particular month. And I woke up one morning and, you know, things they didn't line up exactly right, but the weather was going to be poor at the weekend. So I just said, you know what, I'm just going to go now. I'm just going to go run. And it was kind of a lesson in life and in business. It was really interesting because I only literally decided the night before that I was going to do it that day. But I could have easily backed out. Lots of important things happened, you know, things that were kind of testing my resolve. And I set up a circuit that passed my house 7 times. So it was like a 6.1 kilometer circuit at 7 times. So I could just leave food or water or whatever at the gate of my house. So I didn't have to worry about collapsing and at the side of the road. But it was a really interesting journey because literally, you know, the first few kilometers were great. I was even doing a bit of work, you know, on my answering voice messages and stuff. And then I kind of went off track, and there were really interesting things that happened that really were like a message for life in general. You know, you got to focus on the bigger goal. And then it was actually going so well. About halfway through, I was like, you know what, I could do this under 3.5 hours comfortably. I don't know what everybody's talking about, why this is so hard. And, you know, I started to push it a little bit more. So change the goal halfway through to this new goal. One was finishing it. Now this new one was finishing it in under a certain time. And then suddenly I felt a tweak in one of my calf muscles. Suddenly I started thinking, oh God, what if I don't finish this? And then I went back to just stick to the overall goal. You don't need to add these bells and whistles. And it was amazing that kept happening. But the last 2 miles were very tough. But yeah, and almost like in perfect alignment, my personal trainer happened to be coming back to his home as I was doing my last circuit. So he joined me to help me kind of finish off. He kind of ran with me for the last mile or so. So it was amazing, really, that the way things kept lining up for me as I felt things were going too well, as I was finding things challenging. One funny part was about halfway through when I did consider for a moment, oh, will I bother finishing this today? A friend of mine, the kind of friend that if you tell them what you're doing, if you don't do it, they're always going to remind you of it. And literally, he just happened to be walking his dog. He doesn't even live near me. And I said, I'm actually running a marathon, so I can't stop. And he said, what? You're running a marathon? I said, yeah. And then I knew, because I had made that public declaration and I was halfway there, I was going to finish this. So it was a pretty crazy experience. I know that's a strange way to answer that question, but it was such a strange experience for me because it does show without preparation, it was possible. We definitely undermine ourselves in terms of what we think we're capable of, because we've heard that you must do this and you have to do that and there's only this way of doing it. But when you take your first step, you're one step closer to finishing a marathon, and that's really the attitude. I put in Audible, a book I listened to that was all about stretching your limits, which was kind of a fairly convenient book to be listening to, an appropriate book at the time as well.
Jeez, that sounds insane. In that experience, you said you learned so many lessons. What was like the biggest lesson you took away?
The biggest lesson would be not to overthink your goals. Just get started. Just get going. That would be it, really, because you can build something up into this. I mean, you hear about people talking about marathons. It's nearly worse than them talking about their children. It becomes obsessive. It's all they talk about. Oh, okay, you got injured. Gee, of course you're getting injured. You're hammering your body. 6 months in the lead up to this thing. And I said, well, let's just run once. So I only have to recover once. And that was, I just found it incredible that, like, if you have to slow down, so what? You can still achieve your goals. But if you build it into something else, you're missing out on all these other things you could be doing. So I'm sure marathon runners don't particularly agree with that style, but I did Google that morning, is it recommended to do a marathon without any training? And it obviously said no. I said, okay, well, fair enough. But there were people who had done it. And just to add an important note, I do run every single day and have done for about 1,500 days, but about somewhere between 3 and 5 miles. So I do have mileage built up in me, but I always felt that someday I might just keep going, and like Forrest Gump, I guess, and see. But I wasn't at 26 miles. I was done. I was like, yeah, happy to finish up.
Jeez, that's insane. And I do love that you added that caveat. Like, it's not like you've been sitting on your couch this whole year and then you're like, oh, I'm going to go run a marathon.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It was somehow, I was doing something related to the overall goal that I wanted to achieve, for sure.
Okay, that's good. That's good to know, Paul. But also, I think you mentioned something, especially like, within the middle of the process where you were like, okay, now I'm going to change the goal, right? And then you become so obsessed about achieving the goal in a kind of way, a particular style. And then by the end of it, you're like, I just want to get this done. And I think that's with everything in life. We get started, then somewhere in between, we're like, oh my goodness, this is going so well. Maybe I can do it like this. And then you change course and you're like, no, this is not working. I'm coming back to center.
100% ego and significance came into it suddenly, because now I'm like, well, because I that morning Oprah ran a marathon in 4.5 hours. And I said, well, I cannot go slower than Oprah. I mean, I'm going to finish my marathon before, because in my mind, I'm imagining Oprah in her most overweight state, as you would when you're thinking about that. Not that she'd actually been trained and she was all her personal trainers. So I was like, I'm not, and Puff Daddy was 4 hours and 15 minutes. It's like, okay, that's kind of my worst case scenario if I could finish around somewhere there. But it was amazing that the mind games that you have with yourself, that, suddenly not being happy with the initial goal that you would have been ecstatic with, is that your brain is always there to push it that little bit more, which is kind of incredible, really. But knowing your limits is definitely something that, but don't be it's kind of a bit of a contradiction, because most people would have thought that goal was beyond my limits, but it wasn't. But certainly new limits came in that were beyond my capability. And it's just knowing the difference between the two and knowing how to tell the difference between the two. But that evening I ran a mastermind, and funnily enough, one of my clients in it said his friend had ran 60 marathons. And he said, he always says what you just said, which was that every marathon was like a mini capsule of life that you go through. And there was the most amazing. I passed a funeral. I passed friends I hadn't seen in years. I passed the church that my parents got married in. Because I went off track on a previous one, I had to go find a new route to extend it, and suddenly realize where I was going. And it was like it was really quite bizarre. And apparently that's quite common if you don't go on the standard route that, it's kind of laid out and there's hundreds of thousands of people around you. But yeah, it was a really interesting experience, almost mystical in some ways, I have to say. It was quite strange.
Yeah, I would read that book. If you wrote that book, I would absolutely read it. The lessons I learned on my run. I don't know. But you mentioned something in there where you were speaking about, the distinction we have to make between what is our perceived limitations, the ones we create for ourselves in our minds, and what are our real limitations. That yes, you may not be able to achieve it right now, but it doesn't mean you can't do it in the future. How do you find that people should be able to tell the difference between the two? Because one is 100% fear-based, which means I'm not even going to get started. And then the other is an actual limit.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. You need to constantly challenge yourself to know where your limits are. Like, we stop doing this as adults. When you're a child, you always, if you watch them, two of them, 1 and 4, they're constantly looking at where is that limit. And even in terms of behavioral limits, they know they're about to do something that they might have been scolded for before. So they start looking at you to see what is the limit they could push you to. So just before I came to you, my daughter was licking the pan brush that we brought. I said, what? And she just looked up at me and smiled, because she knew it was totally, wasn't allowed to do it, but I caught her doing it. But so it's all, if you're not pushing your limits like you do as a child, which is your maximum level of growth in your life, you're never going to know what's within those capabilities of yours. So what happens is you naturally start to listen and inherit the limits that your friends and family set upon you, which then makes you go into this state of contraction, and you start to doubt yourself, and you start to take the approach of, well, why bother? Because such and such tested it and they said it's not worth doing. Or this end up being the average person of the people you spend your most time around, because you start to believe their limitations are your limitations, and none of you are going to test anything in that case. And that's why it's so important to start being around people whose limits are so far away from where you perceive them yourself, because that's what will allow you to stretch yourself. So I could easily have said, I don't have time to train for a marathon. Correct, right? But I could have, if deduced from that, I can't run a marathon, right? But they're two completely different things. But I definitely didn't have time to go and say to my wife, hey, I'm running for 12 miles today. I'm running for 14 miles tomorrow. I'm running for 16 miles and get over it. And by the way, this is happening for 6 months. I just knew that was never going to land, right? So it's like, okay, well, that's a limitation that I can't push in that direction. But maybe I could actually just go for one long run and just see what happens. So it's knowing where to push when there's a hard no versus a softer no versus, okay, here's a door that's ready to be opened. But that's all about your peer group. That's all about people who will say, yeah, of course. And then the minute I say I ran a marathon, and suddenly people show up and say, oh, I did that too, no big deal. Oh, now you should go for longer, etc. And I like the fact that then people say, oh, now you need to go and push to get this. And that's where you get this constant desire of just trying to do that little bit more and push yourself to that edge. Because, what I teach people about is business mindset and money, and they're constant tests of mindset, and they're constant tests of your limits, and they're games. Every single one of them involve mind games, and if you can't master those games, you're going to end up losing them, unfortunately, in most cases. So yeah, that's what I certainly think is, if most people just stop testing our limits, we just believe we're done.
Oh, I absolutely love that. And I also love the analogy between adults and children, because it's such an easy one. I don't have kids, but of course I've been around a lot of kids, and you're so right about they're always pushing their limits. They always want to see, okay, I jumped from that height the last time. Can I jump from higher, right? I did this the
Yeah.
last time. Can I do it more? And you're so right, fear and limitations start to set in. So with you, have you always had this mindset? Or was there a point in your life where something triggered and you started to adopt this mindset?
I probably had it as a child. I will, like all children, I would have had it at that point. My parents would have been quite strict. They were both teachers. So they were very strict of what you can and cannot do, which they inherited from the other teachers in their staff room. So it's funny. It's just this wave that's constantly. But when you're brought up by teachers, parenting and teaching becomes a very blurred line, because they're constantly managing children all day. How do you switch that off and turn on? So it becomes like you're in a constant classroom, really. So I was brought up under the belief system everything that had to do with exams and passing exams, and your self-worth was connected to how well you did in exams, and that was very clear around this is how you succeed in life. So I don't think it happened until about 30 years of age when I broke free from that, because I started reading books like from Robert Kiyosaki and Rich Dad Poor Dad, and then I started reading Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. I was always drawn towards that world of personal development, but I didn't realize that to the degree that there genuinely was this whole other world out there of people and teachers and masters of this discipline. So at age 30, I came across it when I went to an event which was about the internet and making money on the internet. But that was kind of the introductory point, because people started introducing me to people like Tony Robbins. And when I went to his first conference in 2009, that was like a complete game changer. Like I quit my job that day. So I did exactly the opposite of what I would recommend to people. But, I just went all in, completely brainwashed, thinking this is the most amazing thing in the world. How could you possibly fail? Let's go. What do you mean walk on fire? Let's jump off a building with no safety net underneath. Let's just do something crazy, because you can go to that one extreme suddenly when you've been so repressed in another way. When you see this element of freedom, it's like children that have never touched alcohol their entire lives, and then they leave home. It's like, okay, give me all the alcohol there's ever been and created. So it's I went a little bit like that, and then but a lot of that naivety actually stood to me. I just believed everybody. If you said you could go make $1 million by doing this, I said, great, so will I. Why not? And so again, it's balance. It's always finding this balance between what your actual limitations are versus what the realities are. But I would say, to answer your question specifically, it was 30 years of age when I really started to embrace this idea that you're living completely in fear without realizing it. It's just the fear of testing something new, the fear of not doing a job, the fear of not going to work at 9 a.m. Like it was like, how crazy would you be perceived by your friends? The biggest fear of all, the fear of what other people think about you. But I'd never had those things categorized for me. It was all just life. But when you kind of broke them down into little elements, like one of the things I do in the Rethink Academy, I use the word rethink a lot as an acronym. And based on John DeMartini's work, John breaks life into like physical, financial, spiritual, social, mental, vocational, family. And I developed that around the rethink word for relationships, earnings, Tao, health, investments, networks, knowledge, and fun. And once you've got those categories, I think it allows you to set goals, set targets, know your limits, know what you're going to push on this year, what do you need to say no to in order to say yes to, and all of these things that I literally had no acknowledgement of. It was just life was about work, finding a partner, having babies, getting into debt as fast as possible, and just get out, drink at the weekend and be happy. How dare you look for anything beyond that? So it was a great release to see that, there is this whole other world out there, which ironically is all internal. But sometimes you need to look outside of yourself before you're told, well, you need to go back within yourself to go discover all of this, because you already know all of this deeply, but it kind of needs to be rekindled for the fire to kind of take off again.
Oh, I absolutely love that. And you speak about at 30, you jump off this cliff, right? Which is exactly what you did. You jump and you end, where do you land? Because it's like one of those stories where sometimes, like I call it the 2-minute Hollywood montage. The struggle point in a movie is like fast forwarded with this beautiful musical montage, and then we get to the happy moment. So what was that moment like for you? Because it could not have been easy to just jump and be like, okay, well, now what?
No, oh yeah. I mean, it was easy at the time. I mean, I literally texted my boss who had paid for me to go to this conference in New York City. I hadn't even Googled Tony Robbins. People talked about him so bit of perspective. At that conference I went to in 2009, I bought 3 separate workshops about how to make money on the internet. It was something I knew absolutely nothing about. I was completely skeptical about it. Being Irish, like we're the most skeptical people in the world. But after relentless talk after talk after talk, and they get it. Like one guy nailed it where he said, look, you think you're smart, because he could see we're all very, arms folded, all very defensive. He said, look, here's the irony. You believe that wealth is connected to the letters you get after your name. In other words, the qualifications that you get. He said, I found as a high school dropout that a much more accurate measure of wealth are the numbers in your bank account rather than the letters after your name. And it was like suddenly this kind of tornado blew across me. We're like, what did he just say? Because he was challenging every belief that I ever had around, wealth is connected to going to school, getting a good, like you have to get good grades to get a good job. And then there's this default mode that we're brought up to believe that getting a good job equals you're somehow going to be fine or do really well financially. No one talks about it, but that's the undercurrent that we all kind of are brought up to believe. So when he did that, he really challenged my belief systems. And I just said, I'm going to buy 3 of these courses. I'm going to stick them on a credit card. And what's the worst that could happen, is that I don't do it. But at least I'll have learned something from this, because I know with certainty what will happen if I don't do this. I just continue on the path that I'm on. And so when I went on those events, that's when I came across Tony Robbins. And that's when I went to it. I still wasn't fully bought into this world. It was a bit crazy, etc., for an Irish person. But at that conference, and again, I nearly left in the morning. Like I very nearly walked out because I just was like, oh my God, it's all Americans and it's all, so yeah, high five and awesome. We're like, oh God, like really, and it was just, but he did say, if you don't participate fully, you're going to end up burning that night. So I went for it, just decided I was going to go for this, and went to one extreme where I literally texted my boss and said, right, your services are no longer going to be required. And 30 days later, we were having our exit interview. And he said, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to go live with passion. It's like, all right, cult. Paul, what are you passionate about? I've absolutely no idea. He's like, well, good luck on your path and on your journey. So I actually decided, this is July 2009, that I was going to go make my fortune. Even though I'd paid for those internet courses, the stock market looked even easier, right? Things could either go up or down. So a 50-50 chance. But I didn't pay for coaching. I didn't pay for mentoring or any of those things. But I ended up losing all of my savings that I built up over 9 years on the stock market in just a couple of months. And suddenly the landing that was relatively soft, I was very like Jack Black in the movie School of Rock, working for the man. I left my job and I was like, you guys are basically losers. You're all still working for the man. I'm going to go do my thing, live with passion, just literally rhetoric, just repeat, fake it till you make it. All this stuff that is well intended. But if that's your only strategy, you got a problem, right? That you've got a major problem. Now, the thing is, you only hear what you want to listen to. So Tony always said at the end of that, by the way, find somebody who's already done what you want to do and pay them to show you how to go from A to B in the fastest time possible. I say, yeah, I'll ignore that piece because that sounds salesy. That's going to cost money. I just want to listen to the high five, and just meditate in the morning and everything was going to work out. So I learned very quickly that you need somebody that knows what they're doing if you're the person who doesn't know. So the landing was very hard. I had 2 houses. I was 300,000 euros in negative equity. I had lost all my money on the stock market. I had no income source. So it was July 2009. I was going to that last workshop that I paid for, and I realized, Jesus, you need to really get focused here quickly. And you need to stop I was spending my days meditating. I got big into Eckhart Tolle and Oprah, all this stuff. Thinking, this is amazing. I love being rich, except I had no money. And then you realize I need to actually do something of value here. I really need to, add some value to the planet. And I had my last workshop coming up that I paid for at that event. And I had to actually sleep on the floor of my aunt's apartment in London because I couldn't afford a hotel at that point. And it was at that event that I actually started applying the skills about the internet. So I kept overthinking it. I was such a perfectionist. I was like, well, I need to be passionate about it. And I don't know if I want to do this forever. And so perfectionists will notice that they get so far ahead of themselves that they don't even get started. But literally on that first day, I started on Twitter. I ended up talking about Twitter with one of the people in the room. And that night, I made my first 2 sales while I slept, selling somebody else's product, just by sending out my first few ever tweets on something I knew nothing about. And I remember my first thought that morning, second morning, was, wow, I need to sleep more. I'm actually making more money while I sleep than while I'm awake. And I went into the conference room the next day saying, I made $44.20 last night. And the speaker was laughing. He said, oh, come up on stage. And he said, explain exactly what you did. And I just went through what I had done and what I'd learned the previous day. And it was from that moment, he kind of was laughing at me. And he said, because he could see I was actually clueless. I was like literally a one-trick pony. I did one thing, it worked, I made money. And now I thought I was going to be, a rock star. He said, right, do you want to make $44.20 every now and again? Or do you want to actually make life-changing money? And I said, well, obviously I want to make life-changing money. He said, it's not obvious to me. I said, what? He said, you spoke to me yesterday. You told me about these 2 workshops you'd been to, how you hated the fact that they kept selling other things like other support and mentoring, and you kind of looked down upon them and how dare they do that. And he said, you don't even know it, but you've got this really negative mindset, and you also believe you know everything, and you're not willing to pay for help. You want everything to be handed to you. And he said, you've come out of a corporate world and you've kept all of those behaviors, but now you don't have that safety net to hold you up. So he said, you need to kind of wake up pretty quickly. If you don't get help, you're going to still end up going back to where you came from. Not that that's a bad thing, but he said, and I was really deflated because I knew what he was going to do next, which was, he said, look, if you want help from me, I can help you do this, but you need to pay for mentoring. And it was like tens of thousands of dollars. Like, I don't have it. And he said, well, tell me, when you had a job, when you had the money, what was your excuse then? I said, I didn't have the money. He said, exactly. And you did have the money. He said, you had it then. Now you actually don't have money and you still use the same excuse. He said, did you realize it was nothing to do with lack of money? It was to do with you do not value getting help, getting mentored. He said, is there any area in life you get mentored? I said, no. And he said, well, he was younger than me, this guy. And he said, you need to stop acting like a child or you're going to keep earning like one, and he really kind of called me out. And sometimes you need to hear this because the people closest to you sometimes are afraid to almost say it. But so I figured out a way, and within 4 months, I was making $10,000 a month. This is the bit that people hear, like you said, the Hollywood moment. Then that doubled the next month, that doubled the next month, that doubled the next month. I made $1 million my first year. We've made almost $50 million at this point. It's kind of crazy kind of how it takes off, but it's only when you look back that you realize it was at those particular moments and those tough conversations that, as Ryan Holiday says, the ego is the enemy. Like, it is totally, it's you getting in your own way for, it's different for me, or whatever your excuse is, whatever your story is, that's all it is. It's a story. Any story can be rewritten. You decide how you want to write your own story. But unfortunately nowadays, especially, people have this sense of entitlement, right? 2 things. They have a sense of entitlement that they want everything. And secondly, without doing anything. And secondly, instant gratification. They want it now as well. Not only do they want everything, they actually want it now. So they're not willing to put the groundwork in to do it either. So we all see what happens to lottery winners, right? Which is the perfect example of it. Okay, well, here's everything now. Let's see what happens. Let's come back in 6 months. Well, the money's all gone. The problem is now your friends and family are gone too, right? Because you've fallen out with all of them because you didn't believe you deserved it, and you naturally will go back to the level that you felt comfortable with in the first place. So if you're not surrounded by people or have people around you that are going to walk you through that journey, it's like trying to go up Everest in your shorts. right? You need to go to base camp and you need to get a Sherpa and you need someone who's going to carry the weight for you until you become comfortable at that altitude. But the irony is, when you're at the bottom of the mountain, you see everybody there, you think, what's the point? There's too many people here. But once you get to base camp, you go, hang on, where are 90% of the people? They're still looking up, planning what they're going to do next, you know, getting their license and their certificate and all this stuff and getting the right gear. While you realize the further you go up the mountain, the less competition there are and the more helpful people become, because they see that you're serious. It's not just talking, it's actually walking, you know, and that's, for me, these things are really important because we've been brought up to think a certain way. And what the older I get, the more I realize the truth is the exact opposite of what you think. Hence why I keep harping on about the point of rethinking what you believe, because generally the approach that you hear in many ways is the exact opposite of what truly works in today's world.
Wow. And like everything you said, you pointed out so many different things. And I think the one big thing I notice about almost every successful person that I've ever interviewed, but also that I've read their books, is all of them will always speak about having a mentor. They'll all speak about having a coach. And what people, I think, tend to hesitate with when they're getting a coach is like, no, I don't want to pay this person to tell me what I know. And I always think to myself, if you knew it, you wouldn't even be considering thinking about paying someone, right? And it's interesting to me how people look at self-development as opposed to university. So they will never invest that money in someone and be like, please coach me, Paul, walk with me through the journey because you know what you're doing. But they'll be like, I'm going to go get myself in student debt to go and get a degree because it's what we're told is normal. So I love the concept of just rethinking what normal is to you.
Look, if you get me started on the educational system, I mean, like that is the big, like that is by far the biggest scam that's going. And I'm speaking from someone as with experience of being completely on the other side, believing 100%. Like if you were talking to the 25-year-old me, I would make the exact opposite argument to this and be so certain in it. That's what's kind of, you know, really is interesting when you've been completely on the other side, because I was bred into believe, like literally bred as a child of two teachers, that this is what success is. Do well, I got a degree in industrial biochemistry. I did a diploma in chemical engineering. Then I did a diploma in project management. I did a master's in business administration, all this stuff. And even when we did the entrepreneurship module in the MBA, I remember thinking, losers, what kind of loser sets up a business that has a 96% chance of failure? I mean, what kind of an idiot does that? Like, that was literally the way I thought about it. Like, quite literally, exactly how I thought it. Why don't you just get paid? Why don't you just someone else take on that risk and you get paid? So, but why I get, you know, why I love to bring this up is because for me, the solution specifically is get on the internet and realize that we've never had an opportunity like this before. You've got 5.5 billion smartphone users, people that you can access 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, who plan in advance before their money even arrives into their bank account, how they're going to spend it on the internet. Like, if you think about it, they want to figure out how they move it from one place on the internet, their bank, into somewhere else on the internet. And they will tell you that it's somehow a scam to think about taking money out of the internet when they feed all of theirs straight into it. And that's the biggest thing going for people listening to this, is that normal people think it's not right to take money out of the internet. How ridiculous it is for me is, it's like saying it's okay to keep making deposits into the bank, but never considering making withdrawals. So don't be an idiot. Bank isn't for withdrawals, it's just for making deposits. But that's exactly how the internet is. It's one big bank of cash that's just moving around in circles, and only the people that realize, well, let's take some of this off the table, are the people making money from it. That's why they don't harp on about how, you know, they don't get too many people involved, because it's great for people like me that people for some reason are told by their families and friends, don't touch it. Go, geez, don't you think about making money on the internet. By the way, we need to book our holiday. Yeah, where do we want to go? And literally book their flights, book. You're like, do you not see that every sale, you decide whether you're the buyer or the seller, right? The money is being exchanged. But why that's so interesting for me is that we contrast that against education. So you spend 22 years in this educational bubble, like from birth to graduation. Then you're meant to work for 42 years to 62 to 64. And so the first 20 years prepare you for the next 40 years. Those next 40 years, by saving 2 to 3% per year, are somehow meant to pay for your last 15 years, if you look at the numbers. Now, there's a big problem here. The educational system and the pension system was designed around with the average age expectancy being 62, 63 years of age. Now, things have completely changed. If you were born today, you are expected to live till 105, 106. So the average person is going to be a centenarian starting from now. The average person. It's not even going to be a big deal. When people die at 105, you know the way now when you hear someone died at 56, you go, God, they were young. And when you were in your 20s, you go, no, they're not young. They're actually old, right? Then you hit your 40s, you're like, Jesus, what? Oh my God. Like they were young, right? So that's going to be how people will talk about people that are dying in their hundreds. They go, God, they were young, weren't they? They didn't get to the 120, the 130, you know, so that's all changing, right? But how on earth are you supposed to pay for 40, 50 years of your life when your health is declining, when your wealth is declining, when you can't go to work, but your expenses are at the highest they're ever going to be because of health expenses? So nobody talks about this stuff because they get so uncomfortable about it, and they'd rather, you know, stick their head in the sand and say, yeah, everyone else is in the same boat. And that's just the common response. But that's what the educational system is training us for, is to get us into, you know, this 40 years of doing whatever we think is enough to, it would have been enough to live for 10 years. But now the people's number one fear isn't public speaking or the kind of things we hear about. It's not death even. It's actually outliving their savings, because that's becoming a very, very real thing for baby boomers in the US in particular, where they're realizing, wow, I'm out of cash and I don't know what to do about it. So they're relying on their kids, etc. So, and then you look at the US government, whose number one asset is actually $1.6 trillion. And that $1.6 trillion is outstanding student loan debt. So the biggest asset of the US government is the debt of the teenage students. The only loan you cannot declare bankruptcy on is a student loan. The average Ivy League university to go to is $46,000, $47,000 a year. Now, this is the US, okay? It's different in different countries. But what you're doing is, and this is how I say it to people, wherever you live, think about a 5-year-old neighbor that you know, right? And now think about a 25-year-old neighbor that you know. Any of them, the 5-year-old and 25 are roughly the same, 8, 28. I can guarantee you that 5-year-old is better off financially than the 25-year-old. I can guarantee, I don't care where you're living in the world, that's going to be the situation. And nobody sits down for a minute and rethinks and questions this and says, how come that 5-year-old is actually better off financially? Now, what does that mean? It means if they cash in everything they have, the 25-year-old owes probably hundreds of thousands of dollars from the mortgage, whatever it is. At least the 5-year-old spends what he's given or she's given. So the older you get, once you hit 17, 18 years of age, now your education has dictated to you. Now it's time to go backwards financially for possibly 30, 35 years. And then if you're lucky and you don't upgrade your house and you're happy to still live in that 2-bed flat that you thought was your dream home when you were 23 years of age, and you're going to pay that off for 35 years and pay twice that amount on interest, and then you're living the dream in your 60s when you can't even remember your memories anymore. It makes no sense, right? It makes no sense that we're living for this future that you're not as healthy, you're not as vibrant, it's not as exciting. You know, everything has been pushed into the future. But so for me, exactly what you said, you know, why do we think and why do parents set aside so much money? It's because of group brain think. You know, we act like sheep when we're a group. You know, we're individually we're smart, but together we're sheeple. You know, and if we're told that everybody does this and this is how it's done, you know, go to the bank, ask for a mortgage, they'll say no. Then say, well, add your partner in. They'll say, well, this is what you can afford. And you look at each other and say, we're not going to live there. No, and me either. And then the bank manager says, well, there's one thing. Like, is there any overtime we haven't accounted for? Are there any bonuses maybe? And then they load it all in, put themselves under the maximum financial stress they can possibly take, then get married, add these dollar muncher children into the mix. And we wonder why there's only a 1 in 2 chance success of marriage happening, you know, and seeing through the 40s. And that's why in the 40s, the average couple break up, because there's just too much pressure, too much financial pressure, and too much group pressure and peer pressure from everybody around you saying, you need to do this, you need, like the word mortgage literally means mortir, meaning death. Like mortgage means debt, acquiring debt until death, right? You can see why mortgage brokers prefer that. Most people don't speak Latin, right? Would you like debt until death? Sorry, what did you say now? Do you have debt until death? I mean, come on, everybody has it, right? But literally, if you explain it in true, meanings of the word, people would at least question it and say, let me go home and have a think about that, right? Or, because they always have this response they've heard from their friend who says, well, you're better off renting, well, you're better off paying a mortgage than renting anyway. And this very quick snap response that they've never done any research on. Or if I say, find an investment at 5% a year, you can't get 5% in the bank. Like, getting angry with me. Like, who said anything about getting 5% in the bank? You did, not me. So, we're so quick to get angry and agitated, and because we need to know everything quickly without ever doing your own research, without ever getting help. And like you said, without ever being willing to pay for somebody to tell you. But ironically, when you're children, the only way you learned anything from reading, writing, walking, talking, cycling was you found somebody who knew how to do it first, and they showed you and they gave you feedback. But the moment you become an adult, we're afraid to do that anymore because society tells you you're an adult. You should know this stuff, right? So that's why adults stay quiet when they don't know anything about money, because they're afraid to ask. They feel stupid, even though the 9 people beside them don't know the answers either. So it just keeps on self-perpetuating, unfortunately. And you're seeing what's happening in countries all over the world right now. It's not good. Unemployment goes higher and higher. The job security is like a contradiction in terms now. There's no such thing as that. Yet the way out with any of this is just so frowned upon and looked down upon. So then people will look to something like crypto or something where it fits perfectly because it's instant gratification. You don't need to do anything. It's always going to go up in your mind, and it's just got to be so careful with all of this stuff. You got to learn from a master. You got to learn from somebody who knows what they're doing. Because if you're emotional about any of this, forget it. As Warren Buffett says, if you can't master your emotions, you can't manage your money. So it all comes down to understanding yourself better and get around people who want to support you and hold you up rather than, pull you down and, would rather not see you succeed, unfortunately. And it keeps coming back to that, the group think that you inherit from where you've been brought up from. And that's why I really admire people that can break through that. And then it's interesting how many of us see it then on our path that we got to go and talk to people about this. We have to provide the alternative argument that there are other ways rather than going to university. I'm not against it per se, but I'm certainly against it as almost being sold to you like a religion. You have to do this or you're an outsider. And you must do this, and everybody does this. Anytime I hear that, I want to do the opposite right away.
Oh man. And you touched on something that I think is the biggest problem. We are in a society of instant gratification. I think everything from the way we date, right? The fact that you have a machine that shows you a picture of someone and you can choose to swipe left or right, like it's a McDonald's menu, right? and that's a human interaction. This is someone you want to get to know, potentially marry, whatever it is. And it gives you that dopamine rush because it's like you can order a human being, literally. You can order a human being, you can order food, and I think because we start getting so used to that, whenever you think of something that's going to take you time to learn or invest in or, get to know, and someone doesn't say to you, and I also think that's why people are so easily conned in the self-help industry, is because if someone tells you all you have to do is meditate, do your affirmations, drink water, sit under the sun, and everything you want is going to come to you instantly, I can see why you'd buy that program. I'd be like, how much did you say? $10,000 to sit under the sun? Take my money, take it, know? And as soon as you put action steps in, people are like, Paul, how long? That just doesn't work for me.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more. Oh. Yeah. But, in fairness to defend that invisible person who sold that $10,000 program of just meditate under the sun, like I've never met those people that, that's kind of the reverse argument that's made about, but there's so many scam artists. I'm yet to meet a person, and I mean, I've met the good, the bad, etc. I've met them, right? But fundamentally, what I've seen from all of them, and that's the truth, all of them, they do all teach ultimately. Like they might sell, right, this is quick, etc. But what they teach is you gotta do the work. Right? You gotta put in the time. You gotta put in the energy. You gotta meditate consistently daily for X amount of time. It's just that people then can easily say, well, you told me that if I meditate and I get in the sun for 25 minutes a day, I'm gonna have $1 million. And the person said, no, I didn't. Right? I actually said that meditation and whatever else, like sitting in the sun, that if you do this alongside this, which you chose not to hear, because I was that person. They said, well, Tony Robbins said, fake it till you make it. And now look at me, I'm completely broke. I'm hundreds of thousands of debt. It's all his fault, right? If you go back and listen to a recording of the event, you feel like an idiot because you're like, oh my God, like I got so sucked into, it was, you hear at the level you're educated to. Right. And you can become so dismissive of, and that's why, even though I know you're not choosing anyone in particular there, sometimes I feel it's too easy for me in the industry also to throw dirt and say, well, other people would say this, but I'm yet to meet a person genuinely who actually at the end of it all says, no, literally, you just press a button, like there's the button, go buy the button. They usually say, okay, you got a lot of buttons to press before you get to that button. Maybe there are some out there. I just haven't met them specifically. They've probably been washed out. But I get what you're saying. But sometimes that's the argument that's made against the entire education, self-education industry is full of scam artists, etc. Now, God, I sound like one because I'm defending it. But that's fine if people think that. But what I just want, even if people did just meditate, or even if they just took some time out for themselves, because the arguments are always not enough time, not enough money. Doesn't matter where you live in the world. I don't have enough time to do it. Don't have enough money to do it. Like, do you have enough money? Well, where is your money going? Print out your bank statements and show me where you're spending your money in your last 3 months. I used to get really agitated when I'd run a webinar and you're selling something for $197 and a 50-year-old is saying, I'm sorry, I'd love to do it. I don't have the money. And you feel like reaching through the screen and say, would you come on? Are you in your 50s and you're telling me you don't have $200 to pay for education that's worth 20 times that? So where is the money going? Oh, I don't have any money. They're lying. But the thing is, they're lying to themselves. And they've told that lie so often that they haven't realized that most of what they say to themselves every single day is not true. And that's the challenge with helping people succeed in life, is they've been telling themselves a lie for so long. In order for them to master the stock market or the internet or whatever it is, property market, you've got to go down deep and unroot and unweed all of these weeds that are sitting there that nobody's ever tended to that garden. Because as you know, with gardens, you have to plant the flowers, but the flowers will only survive if you take the weeds out. So people are willing to plant the seeds, but then they're standing by the seeds going, where the hell are you? I paid for you. I watered you. I'm 24 hours later and I don't see any flowers. I want my money back. Or what the fuck? What? If you did that in gardening, people would kind of put you into a mental home. But that's how people are with the garden of their mind. It's, if you don't, like, nature is the opposite of instant gratification. It shows you that everything needs to be tended to. Everything is seasonal. There's always ups and downs. There's always sickness and health. There's always decay and the growth. There's always support and challenge. And where the industry really causes problems for people is, we help you get happy, right? That's the problem, but not sad, right? So we're bringing you to this one-sidedness, this state of passion. Live with passion. Passion, of course, when you look it up in the dictionary, means to suffer, right? And that's what people will end up realizing, that it's this pursuit of one-sidedness that creates the suffering in the first place. So I know we're getting deep in this podcast, but it's like, if you need to just one book at a time, start to, if you want to do it slowly and at your own pace, just question the beliefs that you have, that you're so strong and so willing to stand by, because it's those beliefs, the BS, the belief systems that you have, that are holding you where you are. Some people use their BS as fertilizer, other people use it to describe the BS that they're stuck in, and why they can't move on from there. But the fast track out of that is just find someone who's been there, done that, cuts through the BS and says, look, if you're going to talk about your story and why your problems, I'm not even interested, because that's your past. It's over. And as long as you live there, it continues to be your present. So you either make a decision like, Eckhart Tolle in The Power of Now, that, there's only ever this one moment, right? And most people never, ever experience it because they're constantly planning what's coming next. How do I escape from this? Or missed opportunities in the past. But if you just start to live in the present and see, what can I do today to help me progress in the way that I want to go in whatever area that is. And that's what we do at Rethink, is we help people in multiple areas, right? Because internet's not for everybody, but health is, and relationships is, and there are all these things that they are all very much connected. And that's the irony with all of this, is that in order to master one, you realize you need to eventually master the others, because you can succeed in one, then you'll fail in the other, because then your balance. Some people will chase money and fame or fortune at the expense of family and relationships because they saw somebody do that. But it's how do you achieve balance in line with what it is that you want to achieve, and what is that message you want to get out there, and but surrounding yourself with the right people to support you on that journey, because life is amazing if you genuinely every morning wake up and see the miracle, that the fact that you're above the ground. And you'll be long enough under it, right? So, why complain when you're above the ground, when all the point up until now we weren't in existence, and there's all this time afterwards that nobody knows what's coming next. It's like life is so short and so precious and so fragile that if you're using it to complain about it, it's so ironic in many ways. Like, you've kind of missed the point, right? Surely it's about the opposite. Surely it's about leaving your mark, about inspiring others, helping people feel better about themselves, move society on, move everything on as much as you possibly can for the few years that you have on the planet, and take care of your body so that you can extend that journey to as long as you possibly can, to create that ripple effect and help people just overcome these unfortunate mental belief systems that the educational system and religious elements also have brought into people, where they don't think for themselves anymore, and they don't realize they have all the power within them. And unfortunately, that creates a kind of systemic problem. But you can get depressed about that, or you realize that, well, I can't fix the system, but I can fix me. I can start with me. Not that you're broken, but you can certainly make adjustments and start to adjust the dial and realize, well, if I start with me and I start with my family, and it can resonate from there.
Oh, I love it. I love how deep we've gone in all of these different conversations and little pathways. And I mean, there's so much I could speak to you about. If I had hours, I think this would go on forever. But I want to know, what are your top 3 success habits? What do you think the 3 things that you've done that have put you to where you are today?
The first thing is, I have absolute clarity on my goals. How I break life up, as I mentioned earlier, into 8 areas: relationships, earning, which is money you make from exchanging time for money, Tao, which is kind of the way underlying spirituality, health, investments, which is money made from money, networks, knowledge, and fun. And I set clear 10-year goals in each, and have a vision board of that 10 years into the future of each. I actually have my last one here from 2008. And I frame them once they're achieved. So that's the first thing. I've got absolute clarity on where I want to go to. Then the second thing is, I decide what habits do I need to create so that the habits will by default result in standards changing, which will result in the goals happening by default. So, for example, one of my goals was to have a body fat of less than 10%, and the standard, the 6-pack, right? And so I created habits around running every day, doing weights daily, and they were the main 2, but I added in other ones as well. But so I clearly align habits with the goal of doing something for at least 67 days, but for me, it's usually around 90 days. And I track that habit every single day, and continue to, and then I add 2 new habits every quarter. So I start with 2 habits on my most important goal. Once they're bedded in, I continue to count them, but I add 2 more. Now, by addition, I don't mean always doing more stuff. So, for example, one of my habits was I stopped eating bread and cheese on the same day, just said, that's it, that's gone. Another one was I removed sugar from my diet. That was it, it was gone. So I add something in and I take something out in terms of habits. And the third thing I use is I use my own planner, right? This has been like 11 years in development basically, but I call it the Rethink planner. And this is basically every morning, you can't see that properly, but every morning I start off with writing down what are the end of quarter goals in each 8 area, what are the top 4 habits that I'm counting, then what are my things I need to do today, and then I have some other information in there. But that's actually, we turn back to the mic here, that's actually the superpower, is having something physical that holds you accountable. Well, like even with all the mentors and coaches in the world, you're still around yourself more than anybody else. So that allows you to turn the goals into reality. And I think that's where a lot of people go wrong with goal setting, is it's very exciting when you do it, but then that's it. It's like, oh, my goals, oh yeah, where did I put them again? You know, it's like at best someone will come back every quarter and look at them. So I literally tell my clients, this is not a non-negotiable. Every day you open your planner and you write in the end of quarter goals for relationships, earning, Dow, health, every single day. And if you find that boring, or if you find that dull, you've picked the wrong goal. You're not excited by your goals. Like if you're getting bored with your own goals, well, how on earth do you expect to go do it, right? So, but the act of writing it every day, then tracking your habits, which gives you the certainty that you're knowing you're going to get there. And then that quarterly goal is building towards your 10-year goal. That for me is what changes everything. And it only takes 10 minutes a day. And if people say I'm too busy, I say, well, you need it more than anybody else. If you're too busy to plan your own life, someone else is planning your life for you. You just haven't realized it yet.
Oh, I love it. I absolutely love it. And as we close off, Paul, the last thing I'm going to ask you is, why do you do what you do?
What do I do? I love it. I absolutely love the fulfillment you get from changing people's lives. I'll premise that by saying I did not start like that. It was very different. My first year was about getting rich. I made my first $1 million, didn't keep very much of it, and realized very quickly that there's very little fulfillment in money itself. It's in what you can do as a result of it. And I was very fortunate to meet an Australian rugby player. Your South African listeners may not appreciate this, but David Pocock, who was just such an amazing inspiration to me. He was born in Zimbabwe, and they were kicked off the family farm at 15, 16 years of age. He used to sleep with a machete under his pillow every night, and things got really bad. Moved to Australia, and he became, their captain. And he's just literally about 2 months ago got voted in the top 3 players of the decade of the 2000s rugby, like behind it, Dan Carter and Richie McCaw. Then it was David Pocock. And he used all of his branding and notoriety to go back, set up a charity in Zimbabwe and help empower locals there so that they could rely on their own economies and creating their own businesses rather than handouts and charity. And when I first met him, I felt like such a loser, because this guy who was so much younger than me really had a focus that was not, it involved money, but the money wasn't for him, right? It wasn't to line. It was to go and actually empower others. And that really got me thinking about, I need to expand my limits, going back to perfect way to finish, really, right? Going back to where we started, because my limit was, make some money, all problems go away, right? Then I realized you can get motivated by money, but motivated is short term. It's short term. And I'm not, that's why people go to motivational events all the time, because they need this hit. What your inspiration is what comes from within. How can you help others? How can you inspire others? And it was back then when I started to realize, you know what? I'm the son of 2 teachers. I'm meant to teach, but I think I'm really meant to teach children. I'm really meant, and I haven't even touched on this, but I'm really meant to teach. I'm teaching children that are now in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, but they don't see themselves as children, but they are children in adult bodies. They really are. When you challenge people on something they don't know, they just turn into children and go, well, that's, we get all defensive. We don't know what to do. We go back to acting like a child. But when you can help children at a young age learn these skills around financial literacy, around helping others, philanthropy, giving back, knowing there's a lot more to money than what you can buy. I felt that was wide open. And the reason why no one would go for it and as a business opportunity was because there's no money in it, or there's very little, right? It's very difficult to convince parents to go and buy stuff for their kids because, they just want them out of the home, et cetera, et cetera. So that was the spawning of financial freedom, which is helping children across the globe become financially literate, have fun doing it. It's all animated cartoons, et cetera. And all of what I do within Rethink for me now is channeled into that, because I see by teaching the adults, I get to the parents or the grandparents or the uncles and the aunts. And that allows me to fund and put the effort into the children's side of it. Plus, we created a foundation with it. And we launched it in Johannesburg, actually, a couple of years back with 55,000 children at the first one, which was just insane because there's such an appetite for this. So that is my main driver right now, is growing that to being a literally global recognizable brand where that's the stamp. My name isn't really attached to it. It's all financial freedom. It's a brand in its own entity. I'm not looking for significance or, hey, this is that good guy that did this. I'm not going out doing interviews about it, but I wanted to be a brand that I know in the background. Well, that was something that was sparked, years ago. And if I hadn't done that, or if I hadn't followed through on that, there's literally millions of children who'd be waking up this morning without that knowledge. Because if we can get kids at a young age to understand how these things work and have fun with it and just embrace it, they can make better decisions. You're going to literally, like, why is crime committed? Like, most of the time, it's money, it's lack of money, scarcity of money, people chasing what's not theirs. So if you can teach those lessons, you can literally change society for the better. If you can do it at a young enough age and help the people who need it the most, because they're the most likely to fall into the traps that are unfortunately set. So that's why I'm doing this now. And that's where I see phase 2 of my journey is really exploding this over the next decade. And there's a lot of work, a lot of money needs to go into it, but it's totally worthwhile.
Oh, Paul. I mean, this interview has been just so incredible. And I'm also glad that you launched it in my hometown, which is Johannesburg.
Cool.
I was like, yay, my people. But seriously, this has been such a phenomenal time spent with you. So thank you so much for spending time with us.
Thank you for having me, and really appreciate those of you that listened to it all.
I absolutely loved this conversation. Tell me, what were some of the biggest things you learned from Paul today? I love that Paul is actually a completely humble, but also highly accomplished actual financial advisor. There's so many things that Paul highlighted for me that I would have actually never considered or thought of. Tell us what you've learned from this podcast. And also, if you are not a part of the Real Success Club, be sure that you are checking us out. I will put the link in the show notes. And also, if you want to be sure to catch our summits that are usually coming up, or any other event we might be hosting, be sure to check out our links in the bio. Thank you so much for spending time with us, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.